Hey 3DMJers, this is Andrea Valdez, and you're listening to the 3D Muscle Journey podcast. Today, you'll hear two of our head coaches, Alberto Nunez and Jeff Alberts, along with our team's mental health consultant, Amanda Rizzo, talk about how to deal with stress. As we all know, every human has stressors in life, whether they're an athlete, lifter, or not. And while the team will definitely be talking about general stress as well, the focus of today's show is about how bodybuilders can create, manage, mask, and minimize stress throughout a career and on a daily basis. The coaches will tell you about the role of stress in their own athletic journeys and in the lives of their clients. Amanda will examine these anecdotes and offer some guidance and support on how to make the best of the sport that unfortunately can often become a catalyst for stress across all areas of life if we aren't careful. As always, if you have any feedback or comments on this particular episode, head on over to 3dmusclejourney.com or to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/team3dmj and leave it under podcast number 178. So let's get into it. Here is Mastering Stress as a Bodybuilder with Amanda Rizzo, Jeff Alberts, and Alberto Nunez.
All right, guys, I have something to tell you. I'm stressed. I'm stressed because my sport revolves around stress, right? You stress and then you adapt. There's an endless list of things to seemingly do as a bodybuilder. It intertwines with the rest of your life. You just don't catch a break. And when I think of bodybuilding, actually, that is probably, as much as I loved it from the get-go, that was probably my hardest. What I realized initially, I'm like, well, this is just a lot to do, a lot to keep track of. And to this day, it still kind of is that way. I mean, it's great because I think it's made me more aware of my stress levels, right? Because, if you don't take care of that, your body's not going to function the way you want it to function. So I'm hyper aware of that, which that in itself can be a stress at times. But that's my story. That's how I'm doing. I'm stressed. And currently this is what's going on. So I'm stressed because, I started partaking in other physical activities. There's some really great basketball games like right down here. And I'm like, hey, this is something different, something I haven't done in years. And now I'm having a hard time balancing that out with my training. Like this whole week I've just been cranky because I've played like maybe 3 games in the last 5 days, or I've played for, three of the last 5 days I've played basketball. And along with that, I have all my other adult responsibilities. I go on my Instagram and I see like some jacked kids that are coming up and I'm like, holy crap, I'm supposed to be competing against these guys. Like I'm going to be out of this sport soon here. So, it's just a bunch of things, right? Jeff, please tell me I'm not the only one who sometimes feels this a little bit overwhelming, right? And you've been doing this almost as long as I've been alive, dude. So yeah, please tell me I'm not the only one, man.
That is so true, huh? Now I'm like really more stressed because I've been training like close to 35 years and I just forgot that you're 38. I'm like, oh my gosh, you were 3. You still had crappy diapers when basically I started. But yeah, I think I relate to the basketball thing. Like, because when my son wants to jump on the trampoline, I'm like, I'm almost 50 years old. I last about 3 minutes jumping with him and then I'm totally gassed out. And then I'm like, this is going to impact my leg days if I keep doing this. So I'm like thinking like all these things are going to my head while I'm doing supposed to be these fun things with my son, and how bodybuilding is, as trivial it is for me, it does create some type of stressor because I still want to excel. Even though I've been doing this for so long, I still have like a super competitive drive in me to do better. So yeah, even to this day, like little things like that, like when you think about it, it's really trivial. Like, oh, I'm going to jump on a trampoline. Like that should not be a stressor in someone's life, in dad life, right? But it is because of bodybuilding. Then I think of, okay, how am I going to intertwine those worlds, like dad world, bodybuilding world, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's just one trivial aspect, but I know a lot of us out there, there's a lot of other things that I think that are much bigger in scope where, stress does really kind of hinder progress both in and out of the gym. So I think that's some of the things that's on my mind, and I'm sure we'll cover with the rest of the podcast.
I feel like it's been my relationships and then the other stuff that I have to do in life, right? So whether it was, when I was a student, work, it's like sometimes you're just like, I just wish the world would leave me alone and just like let me bodybuild. But obviously it doesn't work that way.
Right. It's like, crap, I got a hot date on Saturday night. How am I going to make that work? Right. I'm supposed to be following this diet.
You're like, so dinner's at 7 p.m. Right. So I need my protein feeding before that at 4 p.m. So yeah, it's just a load of stuff that you sign up with this sport because it doesn't end right when I guess your practice is done, right? Very important things go on outside of the gym. Señorita Rizzo,
yes.
Tell me about your story.
Oh man, stress. How does that make you feel? More stressed. Yeah. Oh my gosh. On the daily, I encounter clients that just come in with stress, and yes, they have symptoms that come along with it that are compounded, whether or not they're part of the bodybuilding field, with life, with relationships, responsibilities, and then other stuff that they want to pursue and are excited about, but becomes a stressor because they put it up on a pedestal and it's like, I have to be perfect, or it has to have some sort of outcome or expectation. And when that's not met, then it's just like a whole cascade of negativity. Yeah, so stress can affect us tremendously. And as we can see, like it could affect our training, affect our mental state, and just affect the way that we perceive life.
Yeah.
So I think it would be great to talk about ways that it has impact. We have seen it impact people, and then how we can manage it.
Yeah. Your body just doesn't function the same. Like nothing is nearly as predictable when you are a little bit overwhelmed by stress. I'd say probably where it's most transparent is going to be probably fat loss phases. Yeah. I think one, because your wick is a little bit smaller. I personally kind of enjoy that part of the prep, that you kind of get to see the real you, because, like you kind of, all the things that you're prone to doing are just that much more like magnified, how you respond to just about everything, right? Whether it be a crappy training program, whether it be some dilemma you have at work, when you're eating less than what your body would like for you to eat, it just exposes that. And then we see that what that in turn does is it can impact the rate of weight loss severely. And sometimes it can impair the athlete from just making the decisions they need to make in order to achieve their goal. So like quite often, food makes it onto their plate. Often doesn't even make it to the plate, it's just from the cupboard to the mouth, and so a hard time adhering. I'd say fat loss phases is where you really, really see it, both in the amount of water retention that takes place, how, as I mean, I'm like deep into my off season. I feel good, but nevertheless, sometimes balancing everything is hard enough as it is. And during a fat loss phase, I'm even more prone to kind of feeling overwhelmed, and the physiological ramifications that follow that, especially during a fat loss phase, can be pretty. Yeah, they can make things harder than they need to be.
I think a lot of when you're trying to either do a fat loss phase or a contest prep, the goal is like, I want to get leaner, I want to look better. So there's high expectations from the get-go, and then we start to put some self-imposed pressure on ourselves. And sometimes it's like we want to get there faster than what is realistic. So when we're not seeing what we want to see now, then that's where, the stress gets heightened. And then you have like all these like just crazy in the moment emotions. And all of a sudden you're making these unguided emotional decisions instead of calming yourself down, taking a step back, looking through a clearer lens, and then realizing, oh, okay, you know what? I have this self-imposed deadline. Like I'm trying to hit a certain body weight in 8 weeks, when it's really not a big deal if I extend the fat loss phase out another 2 or 3 or 4 weeks. So that way it just frees up your mind a little bit, allows you a little more wiggle room to make, some wiser decisions, wiser protocols, where maybe it's, you're a little bit more serene in the environment that you're trying to work from. So I think, and then just being in a deficit itself, obviously that's hard enough, just eating less food. And you factor in most people, they work 9 to 5s. They have families, they have other outlets in life they got to get to. So it's really hard to cater to all those things when you're in a fed state, but to be in a dieted state, it's even harder. So I think a lot of times you have to be aware of like that self-imposed pressure you're putting on yourself. And I know for me, like I even find myself doing that even this deep into, my training, and I'm 35 years in. And sometimes I just take a step back and go, nothing's bad going to happen. I have to, kind of take a step back and just think to myself, okay, what do I have control of and what I don't have control of? Because the things I have control over, okay, I can actually make some changes to better things. The things I don't have control over, well, then I think, okay, what I have control over is how I react to those things. And that right there just helps me change my perspective, and it just alleviates a lot of my stressors and just gives me a little bit more of a clearer picture.
Yeah, Jeff, that's right on the money. Like your reaction to certain events, to the situation, is what makes or breaks our experience. Because, emotions come up. Things might be said with other people, or certain events might transpire and it isn't exactly what you expected. But the way that you're perceiving it and interpreting the events, your emotions, your thoughts around it, can determine essentially a secondary feeling about, what it was that happened. So it's important to be very mindful and aware of what you're saying to yourself and how you're responding to situations. Like Jeff was saying, I have control over how I react. And that's really important to remember, because sometimes we put that blame onto the situation or other people, like, oh, this made me feel angry or frustrated, when in actuality it's your own emotional reaction to it, and you can choose how you want to feel. So do you want to choose to feel well, good, or just roll with the punches, or do you want to sulk in it?
This is something that I've struggled with a lot when I was younger. I'm not just talking bodybuilding, just like life in general. Like I remember, oh shit, the rent's due on the 1st, and like 2 weeks before it, I'm in panic mode. Like I gotta make sure that I have enough money, and it's like constantly on my mind. And I remember my ex-wife saying, "What are you stressing over? Like it's not even the 1st yet, and you're already worried about it." But it was like, that's what I'm talking about, self-imposed stress. Like it was like, I had to kind of ask myself, why am I constantly doing that? And I think a lot of it was just like a personality trait, because my dad's kind of like that. And so I've had to really just teach myself to calm myself down and take a big step back, breathe in, breathe out, and go, okay, I can't control the fact that I don't have the money in my bank account now. Mm-hmm. It's going to be there when I get paid again. Just be responsible with my money when the time comes, make a decision, because I have control over that. And then everything ends up being okay. And that's usually what would happen 9 times out of 10. There was, of course, the one occasion like, oh crap, I'm short by $100 or something like that. But worst thing that would happen is, okay, I got a late fee on my rent. The following week I pay it. And then life moves on. But yeah, it's just, it's really challenging. I think as bodybuilders, we tend to want to know answers ahead of time too. That's really common, I think, with bodybuilders. And that's why we get a lot of questions like, hey, this, and this, what do you think? Or what should I do? And sometimes it's like, well, you have to actually go through an experience in order to kind of cure or to answer those questions. But anyways, I'm rambling. I'm going to let you guys talk because Rizzo's looking at me like, yep, I want to say something. So I'm going to leave it there.
No, it's great that you shared all of that. Yeah, focusing on what is a one-way ticket to having a lack mentality. Like, oh, I don't have the money right now, or I don't have the physique. And then we start, processing all of that and just making it bigger and bigger and bigger. And none of that is productive. Like, how much energy would we save if we would just focus on a task at hand, or just making like the next appropriate decision? And sometimes it's not even addressing the situation and moving on to something else.
Jeff, one thing that your old butt does really well, and this is something that it took me a while to figure this out, is like you adjust your training to where your life stress is at. I remember, I think, so I was going to school full time. I decided to get this job in this marble and granite warehouse. I was lifting rocks all day, basically, and I'm like, you know what? Nothing's going to stop me. Like, I'm going to keep going to the gym 6 days a week. I'm going to keep going with these like 3-hour workouts. Look, obviously I was doing a bunch of things incorrectly, right? But nevertheless, I'm like, I'm going to, this is going to fit. And then eventually, you get to the point where you're like, this is not working out. I'm trying my hardest. It's not for effort. It's just not working out. This is something that I've seen you do repeatedly, depending on what's going on with your personal life. Like, you will kind of adjust your training around that. And I think that's super important. I think most athletes, because we work with that fitness group that took it too far, man. It's like we're like working with the beyond gym rats quite often, right? It's like they want to maximize everything. They want to do everything right. But, we bring up context quite often. And the context of where your life is at right now, I think, is super important when deciding how it is that we're going to design our training, right? And this is something that eventually I think most of us have to kind of learn the hard way. And then once you actually make those adjustments where you're like, okay, realistically, I could probably train 4 days a week. Sessions have to be between 50 and 60 minutes. Finally, the person gives into that. And then they start to progress the way they were trying to progress like all along. So back to you. This is something that you've done really, really well. And I think of like when, becoming a father for the first time, when you were working at the auto plant and you had, like a 90-minute commute each way. Your training always made sense relative to everything else you had going for yourself.
I think back in the day when I was commuting 3 hours a day, like I said, an hour and a half each way, sometimes longer, and working on 5-6 hours sleep for 10 years, I did that. I think what saved me, and this was not by choice, like I didn't know any better, because all I knew at the time was high intensity training, low volume, high intensity. I think that just saved me because I was only training 3 or 4 days a week. But if I was like some of the athletes that I've worked with coming from that type of scenario, I remember one guy I started working with, he was a tile setter. He put floors in for a living. So he's always on his hands and knees, like super physical labor. And he was always, when I got on Skype, he's complaining about low back issues and, he's always tired, et cetera, et cetera. Well, basically asked him what he was doing, and he was deadlifting twice per week. He was squatting twice per week. He was doing RDLs, bent over rows. Like, he was just, in a sense, training his lower back like 100 hours per week. It was just insane. But the mentality was, at the time, like, I have to do this in order to maximize my progress. And he was basing that on external sources of information. So he wasn't really looking at his situation and really, taking a big step back and kind of seeing how these variables play off of each other. Like, obviously, when you're working a physical job like that, you're on your hands and knees, you still have to use your musculature for that. And then, if you're not getting enough sleep, or if your diet's off or whatever, then you're adding on another layer of stress there. And then, I don't know what the family life or anything was like that. So who knows if there was some stress there or not. But right there, I was like, okay, we need to bring the training down. Like we need to chop down some of the days that you're training. We need to remove some of those bigger lifts, go to lifts that are less invasive. And in a sense, in a nutshell, after changing around some training variables, frequency, volume, intensity, all those things, things started to improve. He started to actually perform well and recover well. And that's the thing about with training is like, what we're trying to do is manage, the supply and demand. And I think a lot of times we get too caught up in the external sources of information, or we think there's some magic bullet with a training split. And if we're not following that magic bullet, then we're not being optimal. That creates a sense of stress there. And if we're trying to force ourselves to do that, and it's just not conducive with your own life environment, then you're just adding another layer of stress. And then what ends up happening more times than not is that you start to fail in that.
Yeah.
And when you fail, well, now all of a sudden you got these negative feelings, you got more stress now because of that. So what I like to do is to think about, whether I'm working with an athlete or with myself, is like, what's my current environment like? What can I do to where my quality of training is high? So even if, let's say I only have 30 minutes to train, I only can do 2 exercises, but the quality of them is super high. Like my stress level is going to be on the lower side because I know I have 2 exercises. I could put 100% effort into it. And I know that, again, I'm going to be pushing myself. So the chances of atrophy aren't likely unless I just stop training altogether. So that gives me a sense of comfort, just kind of knowing that, okay, I'm doing as much as I can right now to where I'm going to get really high quality training, and I'm going to recover well, and I'm going to have enough energy and enough time outside of the gym to take care of those other things that are super important in life. So whenever you have like a good quality training in the gym, you have lower stress levels. Therefore, in return, your stress levels on the outside are a little bit more even keeled, and it kind of just plays off of each other. And there's the times where I've tried to force more training in. Usually it just doesn't go too well. Just the stress level gets amplified, like physically, mentally, and emotionally. I'm a bit more stressed. And then, because I'm either fatigued from training now, okay, I'm done with training. Now I'm trying to take care of my son, help him with his homework or whatever. Now I'm like short fused. I don't have the same temperament. Now it impacts them. And then of course, if they're stressed, then they're going to take it back on me, and then creates even more stress. So it's just like the man I was saying earlier, it just kind of just starts to compound. So it seems like crazy to think like, wow, okay, Jeff, you're really going on about this. But I think it's super, super important that we try to be optimal based off of the research and the science out there, but it has to jive well with our life situation. I think the life situation should be thought of first before we try to cater to that stuff.
Yeah. Scaling it, meeting yourself where you're at. And I think that takes a lot of honesty and authenticity from oneself, and then, translating that to your coach if you have one. But yeah, you have to kind of get to the nitty gritty realness of it. Because if you try to force it, it's just going to fall apart. Your training, just the way you're feeling.
Yeah. So Alberto, I mean, you asked me about but I think for you too, because I remember like when we first met, and for a few years thereafter, like you're like always like 5-6 day training splits, like always like a lot. But now it just seems like lately you've toned it down a little bit with yourself, as far as also with your own athletes. It seems like you're toning things down as far as the amount of sheer workload you're putting on people. What do you think has been the shift, or what I'm saying actually true?
Well, one thing's for sure. It's the majority of us, like, we're not going to be doing this like solely full time, like if you look at LeBron James's days, like, okay, yeah, he's like 90 years old, still playing in the NBA, like still looking like a stud, but it's like wake up, massage,
Yeah.
go see my sports psychologist, go have this breakfast that was made specifically for like my caloric needs and high protein and all this, right? So go see the pharmacist, right? All that stuff, right? So anyhow, like with us, it's not like that. Like for the majority of bodybuilders, it's like your life is never going to stop, and that's something that I even remember trying to pick careers like fresh out of high school. What a question to ask an 18-year-old. What do you want to do with the rest of your life? And I'm like, okay, so what's going to fit with like my bodybuilding, that was important, because I knew I kind of wanted to do this thing. And obviously there was a bunch of just unnecessary rules that we followed back then that in hindsight, which again goes back to why you should know the principles, because you can kind of just scrape off the stuff that, the fatty parts that don't really matter. And you just do a better job of doing that over time, just kind of like cutting out the things that, first of all, don't matter. And there's certain things that maybe matter a little bit, but maybe they're not worth stressing about because they rile you up to the point where it just makes you as a whole less effective. And that's something that, I've done with myself. Like I'm still obsessive about this. But, at the same time, like here's one, like if I have a bad training session, it used to be like where did that come from? And it kind of ruined my whole day. Whereas like now it's like, okay, well, let me move on to the next chapter in my day. And let me look back and look at the fact that, out of my last like 18 sessions, like 14 of them have been like awesome, so let's appreciate that for a minute. Right. So, a lot of it is just learning more about just how everything works so that you can really only sweat the stuff that like really, really, really matters. And being more efficient with everything. And this goes to like being in the gym, like when I'm in the gym, like my focus is definitely, it's hard to explain to people, but it's like, I thought I was really focused 10 years ago. But I'll tell you now, like now when it's time to go, like, and it even looks like from the outside that maybe it's like this dude's having too much fun to be going like why is he dancing preset? But like when it's time to switch it on, like you just switch it on, and then when it's time to switch it off, it's like you just switch it off. Like I still do all my visualization stuff, but at the same time, it's like I do what I need to do. I try to be as efficient as I can inside the gym. I understand the fact that I'm not able to control everything because stuff just happens sometimes. Like you see some of the greatest brains, like Greg Nuckols, like a few weeks ago, he's like, this is like I think it was like the first squat PR or something, and I forgot how many years. So a lot of it is just about and he knows all his stuff, right? It's just like, just keep doing your thing and enjoy your process, and eventually you just, the breakthroughs kind of add up. So I care about this as much as ever, but at the same time, there is a point of diminishing returns when it comes to, I guess, certain elements of how obsessive you can become as an athlete, mostly when things don't go your way. But back to your original question, yes, Jeff, I think I've just learned to do more with less. And I think what really got me thinking in that manner was again just the fact that through your 40s you made those years very productive. And I'm like, okay, it's not about how much I can get now, it's not about how much I can get in the next 5 years, but Jeff is a testimony to the fact, and a lot of other bodybuilders, that hey, it's like this takes time anyways, so like quit stressing about little things that didn't go right this week, this day, that's it, stuff like that. So yeah, I've just matured a lot as an athlete, and obviously I try to get my athletes there sooner, as soon as possible, because I don't want them to go through the stuff that I went through. But like anything else that you love, it requires upkeep, and it's going to be frustrating at times, but if you truly find this worth it, you'll stick around and you'll figure things out, and you'll figure out a way to make it mesh with everything else you have going on. So yeah. No, we have changed things up. Thank you for that, Jeff.
Oh, for sure. That's the biggest thing I notice about he's like the maturity level has gotten, like, I think for all of us, on our team. Like the last 10, 11 years, it's the maturity level. The more experience, obviously, it's going to cure a lot of insecurity. There's more confidence there. So obviously your stress is going to be lessened because you kind of know what to expect in a sense. And it removes a lot of that fear and anxiety. But it's kind of like the dieting thing I talked about earlier, like but like what we're talking as far as like how far you can actually progress as a natural bodybuilder and how long you can actually progress. I think both you and I, Berto, I mean, obviously I've been doing it since you were crapping in your pants at 3, but I mean, you're like pushing two decades or more now too. So, and you can still see your physique improving now. So I think a lot of times when people are absorbing information, whether it's on social media or what have you, there's a lot of information out there that I think some of it's just like myths, like that 5-year window. So just like knowing like someone kind of sees that and they believe in it, then they're like, oh shit. And now I get all my gains in the first 5 years. I need to be perfect in the first 5 years. Well, just think of the stress level. Now I have to be as optimal as possible for the next 5 years. Otherwise my window is done. And then that's where people start making, again, uninformed decisions. Well, maybe I'm going to go the other route now because I think I'm tapped out. When I think the reality is that the shelf life as natural bodybuilders or natural athletes in general, it's a lot longer. So I think if you think from that perspective, then you kind of realize, okay, I don't have to be as perfect. It takes some of that pressure off. It's kind of like doing a contest prep. You're trying to lose 20 pounds in 10 weeks. It's like, oh my gosh, like the pressure of that, trying to be perfect for that amount of time where, hey, if I just double my time, well, now it leaves me a lot more wiggle room and there's a lot less stress there. So that's kind of what I noticed, just like engaging with a lot of other bodybuilders online, is just that perspective, like, oh, I gotta be there now or by tomorrow. And I think that right there creates a lot of stress. That's something that I just noticed. Want to point out.
Yeah, we got to pay attention to how we box ourselves in. And in many ways, even if it's with good intentions, like pursuing a bodybuilding career, but we can restrict ourselves so much, to the point where we're not engaging in social events. We're not even doing the normal activities that we used to do outside of bodybuilding because we're just so hyper focused on it. So it's important to pay attention to how much of what I'm doing is absolutely necessary and how much of it is kind of just, on the wayside. It's not that important, and it's hindering the optimality. Yeah.
One thing you said, Amanda, was the whole, you're kind of in charge of your response and your reaction, right? And that is something, as much as, especially early on to get this thing going, like bodybuilding was just something that was just very stressful to manage, is that it made me more aware of just how controlling stress in your life is first of all, it's going to serve your bodybuilding. And then I'm like, oh, wow, like this is just helping me across the board. It's like, let's nip issues before they become these really, really big issues. Let's try to consolidate and organize our life in a way so that, all the aspects of your life just, have their time to shine, right? And it was all with the intentions originally of just making my bodybuilding better. But like now it's finally to the point where it's like, oh, wow, look, I'm scheduling nap time with my dogs because they love that, right? I'm scheduling, dates with my mother, things like that, right? So again, like it's kind of a hard thing to crack. I think especially when you're first getting going with this and, you just want your piece of the pie, but eventually once you figure it out, it was all worth it because I think especially for a bodybuilder, if you listen closely to the whispers, like it can give you an edge when it comes to many things in life because there's so many parallels that, right. So that's been my experience. And it really honestly was not until maybe the last 6-8 years that I can say, okay, we finally have that covered and mastered.
Hey guys, this is Andrea again, popping in to tell you about some of the updates in our video course library, the 3DMJ Vault. We just updated our fat loss Q&A collection, which now includes 26 video chapters with tech supplements of the coaches tackling your questions all about dieting. It's over 2 hours of instruction with a wealth of further learning resources for only $24. Also, later this month, we'll have a new totally free course on blood flow restriction training, which every Vault member gets full access to. The Vault is always growing, and once you create a login, you get all of our free courses plus free previews of all of our paid courses, so you can always try before you buy. Check out all the new and future goodies at 3dmjvault.com. Again, that's 3dmjvault.com. Thanks for listening and enjoy the rest of the show.
Did you find it easier to manage like direct bodybuilding stress or outside, life stress?
Let's see. I'd say probably the outside, because the bodybuilding stuff is so straightforward. It's like sometimes like, maybe I should just stop deadlifting because the fatigue to stimulus ratio is just like, it just has me cranky for like 2 days, So that's a lot more straightforward. But when it comes to like, handling like work schedules, relationships, that is, they're way more complex and sensitive, those things. So yeah, that's definitely been the hardest part. And I think a lot of bodybuilders, the way they prefer to do it is to just be like, well, you know what? I'm just not going to have the full experience when it comes to that end. And to me, it's like, well, that's a cop out. Like, it's totally worth it at the end. And again, if you really pay attention, this will make you better at everything else you do. You just got to give it a chance.
I think for me, when I was younger, bodybuilding didn't stress me in a way. It was a stress reliever. But at the same time, I used it as a crutch to escape from the reality of the real world and things that would stress me in the real world, things I needed to deal with and handle, I chose not to handle because I put bodybuilding first. So the training came first, the shows came first, the dieting came first, and I would just ignore everything else. And even if it was brought to my attention, I would just ignore it. And then when it was done, as far as like a contest season or like that, well, now all of a sudden it's piled up like a big piece of shit that I gotta deal with it. And it's far, far more stressful and worse because of that. So I think for me, like what I've learned over the years is that I need to find a better way of dealing with the real world, which I think now, and obviously now I'm in my 40s, now going into my 50s, I mean, I do a far much better job of, handling the real world situations. And it's made my bodybuilding that much better. But I just recall like for years it was like that. And it wasn't until I kind of went my own way with my ex-wife and we kind of went our own ways. And I wouldn't say bodybuilding was the reason why. It was part of it, but not the sole reason why we split. It was just more we got married right out of high school and we kind of just grew apart over the years. But then when I met my wife now, it was just a whole different dynamic. So in a sense, I saw how important it was to actually have, like, to put work into a healthy relationship. And then becoming a dad, I was like, okay, now there's another layer there. So I had to put my priorities in order and not ignore those life responsibilities. And I think what ended up happening is I kind of went extreme the other way. So at first it was extreme bodybuilding, then it became extreme husband and dad. And then my bodybuilding actually took a shit. So like 4 months I didn't train because I was like, hey, I can't train because it's going to interrupt this and I'm going to be stressed if I do that. So I took it too far the other way. And so it took a while to kind of figure out how to kind of meet both in the middle. And once I did that, it wasn't just happened overnight. It was like, it evolved. But once I finally grasped it, and it wasn't until going through my contest prep in 2014, where it was like a big aha moment after that season was over, because I learned how to ease back on some of those things Berto was talking about. Like, I don't need to eat 6 meals per day. I don't need to be training, on each specific day I'm supposed to train on. So if I have to be flexible and maneuver my training around family, or if I have to tell my family, hey, you know what, I train at 3 p.m. This is my time to train. So, and as long as I communicate that, then they can respect it, and it's a lot easier that way. So just a lot of communication with that. So, long story short, at the end of the season, I learned okay, I can be very flexible with my bodybuilding and still yet, accomplish goals. And I think the biggest thing was just kind of like I talked about earlier, is just extending out my timelines. And I think, when people were seeing my 47-week preps, my 50-week preps, my year-long preps, they just think from well, you can lose that weight a lot faster. So you're basically creating more stress for yourself because you're just making the diet longer. But it was actually allowing me personally to be a lot more flexible with my approach. So I can pick my spots to push and pull back, not just based on bodybuilding, but based on life and bodybuilding. So I was trying to wear a bunch of different hats all at the same time. But it was not until the end of it all where it kind of clicked. I'm like, oh, okay. So that's what being a successful bodybuilder is, both in and out of the gym. But yeah, it's just like with anything, you have to actually go through something to really kind of gain that experience and to kind of ease up on some of that insecurity, the anxiety, and the stressors. Yeah, it's still evolving though. There's still room for improvement on both sides, but I have a lot more awareness now because of that.
That's awesome that both of you was almost the inverse, where Alberto, that bodybuilding was your sanctuary initially, and then it was kind of life stuff where you had to manage more of the stress. And Jeff, you were receiving some stress through the bodybuilding and then ignoring and pushing away the life stuff. And then you had a whole pendulum effect where you focused on the life stuff and then bodybuilding took a hit. But like you said, experience is the greatest teacher for us. And we have to allow ourselves to reflect and, sit with, okay, what happened and what did I get from this? What can I do differently? That's an excellent way to manage stress. Take in all of the feedback that you're receiving from your experience and transforming it.
Yeah, it's not easy though, because when you're going through it, you're like, oh shit, what's going to happen if I miss these training sessions? Or what's going to happen if I eat this chocolate sundae with my son on a Sunday? What's going to happen? Am I going to lose progress? But I also knew that I had to be willing to try, to actually experiment and to actually roll with it. Because if I let fear or anxiety take over, and then I was just going to go back to what I knew. And obviously that didn't work up to that point. So again, it was in the moment, you just don't know, but over time you start to, see things a bit more clearly. And that's what I love about personally, I know this is probably a counseling session for Jeff now, huh? But this is what I personally love about my bodybuilding now, even though I'm in my late 40s, heading into my 50s, is because now I have all this experience under my belt and I can actually enjoy what I'm doing a lot more. And that's why I try to stress with some of the younger people I work with is that, whether you're successful or you're not, as long as you're not hurting yourself, it's such a great learning opportunity and you're going to be better for it in the future. So I just try to make sure that everybody's, just kind of just relaxing a little bit if they can and just enjoy it. Cause shit, nothing's guaranteed. Tomorrow we might not be here. So this might be the last training session you ever have. So even if it's a shitty ass training session, you thought you were going to do a 400-pound squat and it pins you, well, at least you had the opportunity to try a 400-pound squat, So that's the way I kind of look at things now. It's just because of everything I've gone through.
One thing I think bodybuilding does, and as a coach you see this, is that it just exposes certain traits you have and how they can positively or negatively impact. It's like you have this athlete and you're like, oh, that's such a Roger mistake. Oh, that is such a Susano mistake. Right. So, that sort of deal. And it just so happens that's kind of sort of how your you take in other parts of your life. So, for example, for me, I'm not very procedural at all. I'm just not. I'm not. But bodybuilding, in order to like make it work, it's like, guess what? You're going to have to learn a little bit of that, and you're going to have to learn to take up systems, and in turn, eventually that light bulb hits. Again, anytime you master anything, it's like you just start to see it in other things you do in your life, you know. And with bodybuilding, it's like initially, okay, it was a stress. It was just this like freaking nebula of like bullshit that I just couldn't handle. And then eventually it just kind of solidified. It turned into its own thing. And like once I could see what I had going on, I'm like, oh, okay. So if I just start to apply this to my relationships, maybe that can make me more successful in that regard, because I'm probably messing up the exact same way when it comes to my relationships as I am with my bodybuilding. I'm probably doing the exact same thing when it comes to work-related things. And again, bodybuilding exposes that. And I think especially when you're contest prepping, because that is when you are the most impulsive, that is when you're the most like primal, things just kind of happen. You're like, holy shit, that was me. And you create all sorts of stress, and then it's a good time to like walk back and be like, all right, let's see what actually happened here now that we just had a meal. So eventually, if you stick around, like I said, long enough, the whole bodybuilding thing, you will learn enough things about you that you can help put out those little fires in your life while they're still little. And again, it's going to just kind of streamline everything. But it's going to take a while. And to tell you the truth, like I said, it's probably been the last decade or so where I finally started to listen to those whispers. Because before, I just wanted to bodybuild, you know, and it was everything against me and my bodybuilding. So yeah, it's again, and I think the parallels are the same. Like, it doesn't have to be bodybuilding; it can be anything else in life. And I think a fisherman will tell you the exact same thing. You know, dude's been out there in the sea for 30 years, and he will tell you that, you know, kind of the same thing. Through this task, I've kind of learned more about myself in this world and how to make it a better place for me and those that interact with me. So yeah, it's worth it at the end. It's just such a it's such a mess to sort out.
Yeah, that reminds me of the phrase, the way we do one thing is the way we do everything. And dieting and contest prep can certainly highlight a lot of unconditional conditionings that we have. Mm-hmm. Yeah. How do you guys how have you guys worked through those? Not to get into like, I mean, we could all see in each other. All of us who have prepped, like, we'll tell you that, okay, when we're prepping, okay, that is a fucking Jeff thing. Okay, that is a Helms thing. That is a Berto thing. Like, we all have our things that, like, when we're prepping, you know, they're just going to be magnified. And to be honest, I think that's one of the funnest parts, is like going through that, where, yeah, it's the most overwhelming physically when it comes to other aspects of your life. But afterwards, you look back and you're like, all right, okay, now it's really obvious where it is that I'm messing up. But yeah, it takes essential levels of body fat sometimes, but it really, really makes you more transparent, and not just speaking about muscles here.
I think the biggest thing for me is during prep, I think what I do is I put everything, I do this in general, I think, is I put everything before me oftentimes, especially as I became a dad. Like, again, that's the nature of kind of the job as being a dad. Like, okay, got to put the kids first, put your wife first, put my athletes that I work with first. And then it's like, so my day starts in that order. Get up. Well, I lied. I have my coffee. I have to have my coffee. So that's me time, 5 minutes. But after that's like dad mode, get the kid ready, you know, make sure my wife's, you know, off to work, all that good stuff. And then it's like, okay, now I start work. So it's all about the athletes. And then it's not until I get off work where it's like, okay, now it's Jeff, the bodybuilder. I'm going to go train or whatever. So I think oftentimes what I do during prep is I don't cater enough to myself. So in a sense, I think I subdue a lot of unconscious stress. Like, it just gets buried. And then when it's refeed day, all that shit just comes out. Like, all that stress and all that comes out. And I have like, and Berto knows this, like, I'll binge on a refeed day where I'm eating, like, he says, Jeff, stop binging on rice cakes, make it a burrito. But I'll have like, I ate like 30 something rice cakes, just stacked them all up and ate one right after another. And it's not that yeah, obviously you're hungry, but I mean, you get to a point where your stomach's full, and I was full, but I just kept eating. And that happened quite often. I remember Eric's like, Jeff, come on, we have to have some type of structure in place for these refeed days. But I think in hindsight, looking back, like I think I just subdue a lot of that stress. Like I just push it down. Not that I'm ignoring it, but I just push it down. And then it kind of just comes out like all at once. And that's where I turn to. I turn to food. I even do this in the off season. I turn to food as a coping mechanism. And that's something that I still work with to this day. It's like I have to be very aware in the moment of like my eating patterns and how I'm dealing with my stress and finding ways to let that stress out and to deal with it. So that's something that I've been aware with. But again, the contest prep, I think, is really what kind of magnifying it to a point to where I can actually see it. So that's just one of my prep horror stories, I guess I wanted to share.
Yeah. It's got to come out somewhere, somehow. Whether it's through like a binge or actual physical symptoms. Yeah. Or it's just signs to pay attention to. And you guys have had that experience to be able to pick up, okay, these are red flags for myself, but these are red flags for other coaches.
And I think for other athletes, like I think it's common, like we all have those days where we mess up on our diet because of whatever, whether it's stress related or it's just the physical stress of being hungry and you're starving because we're dieting. But I think oftentimes after it's done, then there's a stressor of like, oh shit, I don't want to tell my coach, or I don't want to announce this on social media or whatever. So I think a lot of times, we get looked as like perfect robotic bodybuilders. But I think this is really common across the board, that this is like a lot of people at some point are going to break the diet for whatever reason. And I think there's also a stress component as far as trying to hide it or you're ashamed of it. And to me, I think we're all normal when, if you think about it, we're all human, we're all normal, we're all going to have breaking points. And I just wanted to kind of just say this just to let people who might be listening to this that might have just cheated on their diet, like it's okay. And just to kind of figure out, okay, why did it happen? Okay, then, okay, how can we improve it so maybe it doesn't happen again? But yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there.
So I'm going to pull this is what, I don't know, someone's uncle during like Thanksgiving will do to someone who bodybuilds. They'll lift up their shirt and they'll be like, so what could I do about this right here? Right? And it's like he wants that one answer. It's like, oh, just eat frozen grapes. Like literally, that's a secret. So I'm gonna do this with you, Amanda. When it comes to stress management and pulling yourself back in, what are some just general things that people can do to kind of help slow things down a little bit and help them feel less overwhelmed?
This is very cliche and tossed around quite often, but actually breathing. And okay. Like literally breathing. I think a lot of people have a conditioning of breathing shallowly. So like breathing just with your chest and not having like the full belly expansion. And that can relieve stress almost instantly, especially if we set intentions. And I'll touch on intentions afterwards. But yeah, breathing, assessing your situation, where and how can I make this different? Asking yourself questions, having self-inquiry. How am I thinking about this? How am I perceiving this? And how much of this is actually accurate? Am I just projecting myself into the situation? Or is this actually something really happening and I can change that? And then when it comes to intentions, we can set intentions for our training sessions, for our relationships, for a meeting that we have with work to help us pre-pave that experience. Yeah, I don't know if you guys have set intentions before, maybe with a contest prep, maybe with getting on stage, or just a simple training session that can help us focus and do what it is that we need to do.
The intention bit is interesting because that's kind of sort of what I end up say I'm Skyping with an athlete, they're, here for a one and done Skype. That's usually what I end up doing. Kind of, it's like, okay, this is what we're about to do, and this is why we're doing it, and this is going to be our focus. And if we do this, it's like, it's a win, So it makes them feel better at the end of it. They leave feeling like, oh, I have more control over my bodybuilding now. But it's a lot of it is based over that specific thing right there. Wow. Okay.
Well, and also just being nicer to yourself. We tend to like have a drill sergeant in our heads, just kind of just like whipping us in the back, like, come on, grind hard, do the best, outwork. And that
So
can be effective.
A little more self-empathy.
Yes, more self-empathy. Like, it's okay to make a mistake. It's okay that I slipped up on my diet. All right, let's move forward. What can we do? There's no real productivity with shaming yourself and guilting yourself afterwards. It just makes the issue bigger.
The guilt
and bigger.
of the binge, though, is like, oh, I screwed up. Now I killed my progress. I feel terrible. So I'm gonna make up for it. Now I'm gonna double down on my cardio, or I'm gonna double down on my diet. And all of a sudden now the next day you're even more hungry and more tired. And it's like a vicious cycle. Well, now you binge again, then you feel even shittier, and it's hard to get out of that. So I think, like you said, like the self-empathy part's like, I made a mistake. It's okay. Okay, how do I prevent it from happening again? And having an intention on fixing it and having some type of direction. I think that's pretty important.
Yeah, and taking responsibility for yourself, taking responsibility for the choices that you make, and also not, in like a sabotaging way, but just like, okay, like this happened, I see it. All right, let's make a change.
Well, I feel a whole lot better about my bodybuilding, a little bit less stressed. Might be because today's a day off from the gym. But yeah, no, again, I think for most folks, this is probably one of the most overwhelming sports you could have picked, to be honest. When I look at the entirety of it, the fact that it's inside and outside the gym, the fact that you have to push your body to these weird places, things take so long. It's the payout. It can be elusive. It can take a little bit longer than you like, but it's absolutely worth it. And if you're like me, maybe at some point you'll kind of find parallels between this and everything else in life, and things will make a whole lot more sense. So while it did make me a shittier person, I'd say early on, I think now I'm kind of super compensating in regards to that. So it's well worth it if you stick around. But you're probably not the only one, because I think all of us here at some point, this is meant enough to us where it's causing more, I guess, bad than good in our lives, right?
We need to remember to have fun, not take things so seriously, whether that's absolutely. Bodybuilding or outside life stuff.
Mm-hmm. I think it's important not just for stress, but longevity. Like, obviously, if you're having fun, you're going to keep doing it.
Right.
And I think for a lot of us, we kind of hit that wall where we're like, man, this shit is just, it's not worth it. Then we eventually realize, okay, I just need to lighten up a little bit. And once you lighten up a little bit, you're like, okay, things are a lot better now. My training's a lot better. Life's better, just because the shift went from trying to be super optimal, which ended up being stressful, to now, hey, I'm just going to be optimal under my environment. And that usually brings a lot more joy.
So are we all collectively less stressed now? Do we feel better?
I do.
Okay. All right.
Do we need sessions after this, guys?
Yeah. Let's go lift weights or something. But whatever makes you feel better. But yeah. Again, I think everyone's been there at some point. Life will never completely slow down for your bodybuilding. But eventually you learn to make it work. I think that's all we got for you guys.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for your time.
Thank you for the session. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for dealing with us, Amanda. I appreciate you letting me simplify something that is quite complicated, and there's a lot of context to it, right? So I will say this, I guess sign off with this. I think the whole sports psychology is something that not enough people look into. And I think if this matters to you, it's just kind of how, hey, go seeing a PT, a physical therapist, because, your knee's acting up. Like, as normalized as that is, I think there's a lot of value in perhaps, looking into that. Because I think at one point or another, both me and Jeff can say that for sure, we probably would have benefited from, getting such help. So yeah, take care of what's in between your ears, guys. We'll check you guys out next time. And that's Jeff, Amanda, and Alberto signing out.
What's going on, 3DMJers? Eric Helms here. Thanks for listening to our podcast. I just want to take a second to tell you about MASS, Monthly Applications in Strength Sport. This is a monthly research review that I put out with Greg Knuckles, Dr. Mike Zerdos, and Dr. Eric Trexler, where we cover the most up-to-date, peer-reviewed research in the world of strength and physique sport that's directly relevant to your practice as a coach or an athlete. We provide our reviews in written format, but also, since you enjoy our podcast, in audio roundtable reviews where we discuss the research in depth. Finally, we also do video concept reviews where we cover a broader topic in video format for your learning. For fitness professionals, you can take quizzes on MASS content and earn continuing education credits for most of the biggest certifying bodies in the fitness industry. If you want to sign up and get a subscription, head over to 3dmusclejourney.com and click on the Products tab. Thanks for your time, and thanks for listening.